Without further ado, please welcome to the stage our panel. First of all, David Soripera from Anthropic, Nick Cooper from OpenAI, Ned Exertani from Block, and Jim Zemlin from the Linux Foundation. All right, gentlemen, welcome to MCP Night. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So there was a little bit of news that leaked yesterday around MCP joining forces with the Linux Foundation. David, I was curious if you could start and just talk about that to begin with. You kind of founded this MCP project at Anthropic over a year ago. The idea for it to grow beyond just this initial project into something that was, much, much bigger for the whole community. When did you start thinking about this transition, and why was the Linux Foundation the place that it landed?
Yeah, so when we created MCP, I think we always wanted to create an open ecosystem, and we were aware that in order to do so, you got to really make sure that everybody feels confident that whatever you're building remains like neutral and like open forever. And while I think the intentions from Anthropic are always great around this, there's precedents in the past of like some companies having, not necessarily behaved best. And so for that, you just really want to have a project like MCP find a neutral home. And so we thought about this quite early this year already, around March, to really think about like what is the right way of doing this, what is the right home, what's the right framing of this. And I'm super happy that we found with like Block and OpenAI great partners to like build this foundation under the Linux Foundation, which just like has so much experience building these type of things and helping companies like ours through the process. And so when you have the idea to actually make it happen, it takes a while, and that's what we're here now.
Nick and Malik, I was wondering if you guys could also talk about kind of your involvement in the MCP project as it started, compounding, getting more momentum earlier this year. And in addition to that, these amazing projects, both AgentsMD and Goose, kind of how those grew and evolved into also joining forces with the Linux Foundation.
Very happy to. So MCP solves a real need, much like AgentsMD. There's this need for models to communicate to existing systems, to other systems. In the case of AgentsMD, there's a need for developers to communicate to models to help accelerate their own development environment. And so this real need is sort of distilled into AgentsMD and MCP. And we've been eagerly involved from the start in both, because we're very happy that these open foundations and open standards are really what's needed to encourage communication to work equally between all parties.
Yeah, so Michael, I'll start with the story of Goose, really, and how that all evolved. It kind of fits into this quite nicely. So Goose is something that Block started building late last year internally as an internal project. It was an agent to help with software development, plugging into various LLMs. And quickly we realized that we needed a standard way to work with third-party systems, with internal systems, with file systems, things like that. And we've had a pretty strong working relationship with Anthropic for a long time anyway, and we started early conversations. We realized we needed something like MCP to exist. We ended up becoming design partners. We built out what MCP is, and we also open-sourced Goose early this year, actually, and that's been on a crazy trajectory of its own. And at some point realized, well, this actually, again, needs to exist somewhere neutral, in a proper foundation with vendor-neutral governance. And I started exploring what that looks like, initially actually with the CNCF, and then realized, well, that isn't quite the right place for it either. We started talking about the Linux Foundation in general. Does Goose go there? And got wind of the fact that, that David was thinking the same thing for MCP. So he reached out, we started talking, and the rest, as they say, is history. That's where the Agentic AI Foundation came from.
And Jim, you're here from the Linux Foundation.
That's
Lead
right.
the Linux Foundation.
That's right.
What did you think when these crazy guys approached you about this project? When did you learn about MCP?
Well, I've been working at the Linux Foundation for over 20 years, and I've had the fortune of being through a bunch of waves of technology. Operating systems with Linux, obviously. In cloud computing, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and Kubernetes really transformed the way that cloud services and applications get built and deployed. And with AI, it's clear that we're kind of in a third stage. We started with large language models and chat, and then reasoning models, scale, inference, and now agents. And at the Linux Foundation, we want to be a part of those big transformational moments. In fact, when we look at the technology that we work on, we ask 3 questions. 1, is this technology going to move the needle on industry and society? We're a nonprofit, so we don't measure our success by financial outcomes. We measure it by impact. And it's clear that agentic AI and protocols like MCP are going to be a massive part of sort of the last mile of AI, so to speak. How you take this intelligence and connect it to real systems and allow it to work behind the scenes autonomously to solve real problems. Like this is a big deal. Then of course the second question we ask is, do you need more than one organization to actually do this? Because if one company or entity can do it on their own, you don't need the Linux Foundation, right? You can just go do it. But for fundamental technology, protocols, core technology that's pre-competitive, that makes markets, it takes more than one company or organization or developer to do it. Software is so complex now. No single company, no single individual can write everything they need to get things done. And that's particularly important at the protocol level. And so when I started talking to David, started realizing how big of a deal MCP would be, I wasn't sure whether to think of you, David, as Vint Cerf or Linus Torvalds of AI. So I'm fond of Linus, but I think this is going to go down in history as a moment where we all got together and really unlocked a whole new set of capabilities in a big market around AI. And so that's why the Linux Foundation is a part of it.
I think between those folks, one curses more than the other, so you can make up your mind which one you want to be. It's really a privilege to have all of you on the same stage together, and it's interesting that the companies you work at, they compete often, whether that's in terms of new models, that are being benchmarked against each other, different clients, that are using MCP, and just different organizations building towards this AI future. I'm curious if you can talk about the process around collaboration here, what that looks like across these companies where you're cooperating, kind of coming together for this shared platform. It's kind of a different motion than maybe most people are exposed to of how these companies operate.
I think we actually are very aligned on this, and that's the biggest thing here, which is we're really grounded in giving utility to users and developers, and that's where we come from. David and myself are both very technical people. We really believe in principled expansions of these protocols. And the other thing is, actually, as you yourself put in the opening note tonight, there's clients and applications. There's this communication that I believe in your slide, WorkOS helps enterprise, etc. But that communication requires more than one party. And so for that, we need these open forums where we can establish communication between everyone, we can build what makes sense together, we can deliver value to users, developers, businesses, and so on.
I also think if you look back at other, technology waves like cloud and before that, maybe, operating systems or whatever, I think there's common layers, particularly on the infrastructure side, that really help make everybody in the industry just better off. And I think protocols of connectivity and communication like MCP are part of that. And so I'm very grateful that we all can work together on this. And, I'm quite privileged today that I'm can help steer MCP, but at the same time, I have people like Nick, like Dan, and others to lean on and help me get a different perspective from different companies, and really together drive the direction of the protocol forward, which is basically what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, I think there's place for that in the industry, and then there are places where we can compete.
So another area of competition, right, and is protocols, of course, always help standardization over there. The other area is in the coding agent space. So Goose is a software coding agent again, and both Anthropic and OpenAI have their own as well. And that diversity, I think, is really important, to have that diversity to prove out the protocol, that the protocol works across different agents, which have different biases and different specializations. Like in Goose's case, for example, we are model agnostic. We can actually use multiple models from different vendors at the same time, and proving that, for example, good protocols and good standards work even in those cases.
Yeah, I think it's actually, like, to me, protocols, as I said, are like communication, and like it's only with this like open communication, open standards, that we get like a competitive angle that delivers value for people. Like, if everyone can communicate, it's like an open marketplace, and we'll see the best, most valuable things work.
So this all sounds very idyllic. What happens when you folks disagree? Does Jim get involved and break the tie?
We all go to Jim and say,
Do you guys wrestle? Like how does this work?
Yeah. Well, this starts to lead to a blame the referee conundrum.
You have a whistle, you know?
Exactly.
How is it? Well, the Linux Foundation has obviously very successfully navigated this with, you know, people who have started big projects like Linus and other ones that have been in it. How do you think about approaching this in terms of kind of moving things forward? I imagine there's still going to need to be a bunch of big decisions made in MCP.
But let's talk about the kind of decisions that get made. The first thing you want to do in any governance structure like this is make sure that you preserve the organic innovation that's working. So no Linux Foundation project requires any form of membership in the Linux Foundation at all. I'm probably selling against myself here, but you can go directly to the GitHub repositories, you can go to the Discord servers, you can go to the Slack channels, you can go anywhere and just start participating in the community. Like a good idea, connection to the internet, you can go make this stuff happen. Keep that going. Now there are useful collective decisions, and they tend to be around things like certification programs. I think I heard a previous speaker saying like we'd like to see more, you know, around certification. Those will be conversations that happen, but those will also largely happen in a technical steering committee, a grassroots project, because those are the people who have the clearest sort of ear to the ground in terms of what's actually being used and where innovation is happening. The final thing that people have to agree on in this kind of organization is how do we go make the market together? You know, where are there gaps in technology that maybe we can have the entire industry agree, like we're all going to collectively work on that? How do we convene like this, but much larger? Like how do we get, you know, I was at KubeCon in Atlanta, 10,000 people in a room like this geeking out about cloud computing. Those are the things that we do. So I think preserve the organic innovation decision making, make sure the technologies who are close to the problem solve the big and decide on the big issues, and then the market makers tend to be the companies who come together in this consortium.
I think it's also good to remember that like there's two like things here. There's the one thing where like how we steering the foundation. We're a governance board, and then how do we steer MCP as a project? And within MCP, the structure basically remains the same, which is to say there is a small group of what we call core maintainers who are reviewing like formal proposals to make changes to the specification, and then if there were, which actually has never happened, like things where we disagree, then I get to make the final decision.
Yeah, I think like there's this perception that like we're coming with very opposed technical things here, but MCP and protocols in general and AgentsMD, they sort of, they're not really something you specify proactively completely. Like you sort of distill it from a need or a problem that people have today. And when it comes to that, then the discussion becomes like what works for people, what works for users, what works for developers, and there's different styles of things, but ultimately like I find every core maintainer meeting, like all day yesterday we were at a core maintainer meeting, and we just really reach alignment real quickly.
When we disagree as a group together with the people who bring the proposal more often than not.
Interesting. You're aligned around the others.
You're good at saying no together.
All right, great. I think it's really incredible that Goose is joining this too. I want to talk more about that. MCP as a protocol, without Goose doesn't really have like a reference client implementation. There's things like, ChatGPT or Claude that have it, but it's not very hackable. And I remember at the last MCP Night 2.0, all this stuff around MCP UI, I think Goose was one of the first clients that had support in this experimental branch because it was open source. Can you talk about like the importance of that as it relates to the protocol development in this bigger community?
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's something that I really care deeply about, actually, being able to provide that sandbox almost where new ideas can be tried out, where we can experiment with new protocols, extensions, things like that to the protocol, or new protocols themselves as they come up, and to actually build it and put it in people's hands and see how people use it and really feel for how it's impacting the community at large. So yeah, I think Goose serves that purpose really well. But to your point, it's also hackable in the sense that people can then take it and then build on top of that and build their own products on top of it as they want to. So think of it as perhaps what Firefox is in the browser world. Existing browsers, companies have their own browsers, it's absolutely fine. That's the lion's share of what people use. But having a neutral, vendor-independent browser that's standards compliant, that implements the entire protocol stack is important as well.
There's also like a little bit of like a history there that I think, Manik often doesn't tell, but like Brad, when he created like Goose, they were actually one of the very first to approach us when we open sourced MCP, and we're like, oh, we have been building something like a protocol-like-ish thing internally, and we're just going to move over to MCP, and actually they were the first people making a change to MCP outside of Anthropic.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, sort of on the earlier point about how do we deal with disagreements. Like, as a core steering committee, pretty much the most common feedback we give to any proposed change is, have you tried it out? Like, have you hacked this together? Have you demonstrated that it works? And that's why systems like Goose are invaluable for this.
Yeah, the story of like the web being moved forward really fast, I think is based on open source browsers being able to get hacked together and canary nightly releases and stuff like that. And so when I heard the news that Goose was being included in this move, I was absolutely thrilled. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to do, right? If you have an organization which is primarily focused on protocols, without a tangible manifestation of that protocol, it's kind of hard to move fast and visualize and feel it. So yeah, Goose fills that purpose.
What do you think we're talking about here in a year if we're doing MCP Night 2026? The protocols move to the Linux Foundation. There's a lot more meetups and events and clients that have gotten built. What do you think are the biggest changes that are going to occur in the next year? Crystal ball.
I think we're going to need to find a bigger venue.
That's right.
As awesome as this venue is, we'll still need a bigger venue.
That's a good venue. I think there's a few things that we're going to do now, like in the protocol itself, right? We have like tasks that we introduced. We have like maybe some more changes to transports. But I don't know, like the interesting part I think about MCP is that we're trying to capture the patterns the creative patterns that users came up with, and what the patterns that the industry has developed, and trying to capture this in the most useful way in a protocol. And it's very hard. I don't think we want to be in the business of trying to predict what's going to be there in a year, but instead build a protocol that's open enough and has the right building blocks and the right components that you can build the things you really want to build, and then like observe the type of patterns. Like when we looked about like long-running operations, maybe a year ago, maybe we could have predicted it's there, but we would have probably predicted 3 other things that we were wrong about, and then the protocol would have it now, and we would have be like, well, shit, now let's get rid of that. But instead,
can you talk more about that? What are mistakes that you would do over if you were maybe going back in time a year?
Mistakes that we've made, man. I'm
putting you on the spot.
Yeah. So I guess there's a few things that we got wrong, and I think like or not right, not perfect. Like let's just put it that way. Like transport, like remote transport, I think is like a common hot topic that we just spent 2 days with the core maintainers to just talk about that again, because there are just some issues there that are really valid and that we listen to. And I think knowing what I know now, a year ago I would have made a very different choice of like how I would want to have remote MCP servers go. And the same around like some of the decisions we made around like authentication at the time, where I think the right ones were having even told by experts to be the right one, and then but then we had to actually continue to evolve the actual OAuth specification together, and if that would be already done, then I would have not done DCR in the first place, right? So there's some of these issues there that I think you could have done differently. But overall, I think we got more right than wrong. In terms of primitives, I think we've always leaned towards fewer things, and I still think they make mostly sense. So yeah.
So I sort of think one of the strengths of MCP is the evolution and growth it has. And this is something that's very exciting about the AI Agentic Foundation, which is all of this is a beginning. This is a standard of where we are today and creating a forum for it to grow and evolve. There are mistakes perhaps in hindsight, but we had to make those learnings to move forward. And when you say what's 12 months from now, part of me, I just don't know. But I'm very excited for the Agentic Foundation to be this opportunity to collect other things and make them compose and work together. And then I think none of us here will really know. We'll see something emergent.
Yeah, I think it's about being smart about how are we going to change it, and how you observe what you need to change is more important than getting it perfect in the first place, because you probably won't.
Well, that's the whole point of the foundation, right? To create that crucible so that the ideas have a space, so they can be discovered, so the conversations can happen, and we can learn along the way and figure out what happens over time. I mean, there's some things you can kind of guess, sure, they're going to be either new protocols that'll address things like payments or processing money, security, as you mentioned earlier in your talk. There are obviously going to be a few things like that, but there are going to be many more that we can't see yet. So we'll have to figure those out.
I hesitate to make any predictions about the AI market space, because I think what was going on a year ago, and would I have anticipated where we are right now, I think it would have been a tough one to call. But let me give you some indicators of where we're going to be next year in 3 chapters, based on other big movements in computing that I've seen. Chapter 1, when I first started working at the Linux Foundation, this is over 20 years ago, I went out on a blind date with my now wife, who I think is sitting right there. She's kind of somewhere. I can barely see it with the lights. And she asked me, she's a tech exec herself, she went to Harvard Business School, and says, "What do you do?" "Well, I work at this nonprofit, it's Linux, we kind of give stuff away for free." And I love you, but the look of disappointment on your face was palpable. It took a long time, for Linux to be good. We're still married, so it's good, but it took a long time for Linux to be a thing. But it eventually did, and I'm still married. In chapter 2, Kubernetes. Urs Holtzel, Brian Stevens from Google call up and say, "We want to be in cloud computing." And at the time, it's 2014, Amazon's the market leader. They're running virtual machines in the cloud. And what Google says is, "We will give away our secret sauce." The Borg will rename it Kubernetes, but we're going to give the tool we use to run containers, we've never run a VM, to the entire world. We'll give it to the Linux Foundation. Neutral place, you own it. Your job is to go get the entire world to change from the old way of cloud computing to containers and Kubernetes. And when I first started recruiting organizations and come on in and do that, it was a slog. It was still, Docker was a thing, Mesos was a thing, PaaS was a thing. No one really knew what the cloud abstraction was going to be. And so it took a while. Not as long as Linux, but it took a while. This organization, the Agentic AI Foundation, and MCP, I've never seen anything like it. Day 1, 50 companies all participating in the launch of this organization. I was just in Tokyo. I gave a dinner speech today so I have 2 Wednesdays, in front of business leaders and tech executives there. They are clamoring to participate. They see the value that agentic tools and MCP and technology like this can unlock. I've never seen anything like it. I think a year from now, I hope we're in a much larger venue. I think you will need that.
Chase Center. What do you guys think? Yeah.
Ambitious.
Our operations team is
All
going
right.
to kill me.
Now you're getting, let's start with Moscone, but we'll get there.
All right.
But I think what you're going to start seeing is what people are clamoring for, which is a lot of success stories where people are using this technology to solve really big problems, like achieving that last mile. The other thing that you're going to see is what we see, and what I hope happens in this world that we saw in CNCF. How many people here work at like an MCP-based startup or working in an Agentic startup out there? Because quite a lot. How many folks are at enterprise companies or AI companies that are working on this? Quite a lot. We got a lot of entrepreneurs in the house. That's great. Here's what happened in CNCF. Billions of dollars of venture investment started pouring in to the CNCF community and the Kubernetes and container community. Billions of dollars also started manifesting themselves in outcomes. Joe Beta and Craig McCluskey, Joe was an original Kubernetes maintainer. Craig was the person I worked with at Google. They started a company called Heptio. I think on exit, and Craig's in the audience, he'll get mad at me, each of those guys made $100 million personally. I want everyone who's working to make this ecosystem to go out and get rich. That opportunity is in front of you. And I know that I'm not going to because I work at a nonprofit. Which, just to circle back to my wife, she reminds me all the time. But I want you all to be successful, and I think that's going to start happening. More success stories, more investment, more mature technology, and we're going to unlock a massive, massive economy here and build some just insane generational tech. I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, round of applause for that. I noticed it's not called the MCP Foundation. It's the Agentic AI Foundation instead. Can you talk about that, where MCP overlaps with agents? What is this agent future and where are we going?
I think MCP is quite essential for any type of agentic, work. Out of two pieces, I think there's one aspect where an agent wants context in terms of like reaching out to the world about like be it the systems, your accounting software, whatever software you want to like connect it to and get context from there. And I think to have the agent operate. But I do think like now with things like task and other things, we're really seeing what MCP can do in terms of like agent-to-agent communication and talking, having an MCP client-server combination talk to each other and really like operate like as an agent-to-agent communication piece. And so I think it's quite essential having a protocol that allows you to reach out from the agent into the outside world. And I think that's what MCP is trying to accomplish, and I think has so far been proven to accomplish.
Yeah, so I very agree with that like MCP is like foundational for models getting context. But the foundation itself, this is all the beginning. I think there's such a large variety in how humanity can find and use agents, what types of work those agents do, what tools they need to use and how they communicate, that it's really not going to be a question of one standard or one protocol at all, but multiple composable elements that can be brought together to form a variety of agentic systems and serve various needs. And that's why I'm very excited for contributions like MCP obviously for model context, but also Agents MD for understanding developers and agents and that relationship in a bit of a different way. And then future things that I hope people can bring to this foundation to really make a strong foundation that represents many facets of agent utility, not just the communication part.
And then that's sort of what I mean by the foundation being this crucible for where that conversation happens. This is where those new protocols will get founded or brought to eventually. And that's where we start to see it all get orchestrated and working together in one place.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the internet is not called HTTP. Open source people are just not good at naming.
One of the hardest problems.
I wanted to call it the OpenAI Foundation, but that one was taken. So But I do think these guys are right. It's about, the protocol is essential. Like, it's what unlocks the bigger ecosystem. But there are lots of problems on the way that need to be solved, and having a place where people get together and solve those. And we don't even know what technology we may or may not need in the next 6 months, but we'll all be together trying to solve that together. So you want to pick a more broader way to describe that effort. And so I think that the Agentic AI Foundation really encapsulates this next chapter in AI, and I'm just super humbled to be a part of it.
Last question for you guys. You have a captive audience here of a lot of engineers, developers, startup founders. I think there's even some venture capitalists in the room. What would you ask them to do to get involved in MCP or to get building in this dimension? You know, new people that are just discovering this for the first time, that are curious, these creative minds. How can they best contribute to this direction, whether it's the Agentic AI Foundation or MCP as a protocol, the clients, or what? What would be your call to action to all of them?
I think for me it's quite simply, let's just build. I think that's just like the most important part you can always do is be creative, like build for the users you have, build for the thing, for the market you want to build for, and try to innovate in that space. And I think from there on, you might discover patterns that, that are interesting, that are new, that we want to learn from, and that's when you go into the community that we have built, or if you build whole projects that are important and could be part of something like an Agentic AI Foundation, then you come to us. But I think the most important part that all of this starts, and all of these things, be it AgenMD, be it Goose, be it MCP, have started with, is like, find your problem and go and build. And that's, I think, for me, the most important part.
I would add, in addition to building, which is critical, is also like just talk about it. Like, we've used HTTP a few times today as an analogy. Like HTTP, there was various versions, then 1, then 1.1, then 2, now 3. Evolution is key to the success of these protocols and systems. It's the key to the success of the Agentic AI Foundation. So I'm so excited for everyone to go ahead and build and deploy, but this is a beginning. We need to have these protocols evolve, the foundation evolve, and just communicate and be really open with input about what works and what doesn't work for you.
So you've kind of both already said what I was going to say in combination, but what I was going to say was pretty much go try it out and give us that feedback. Tell us how you want things to change, or if you want changes to the MCP itself, or additional protocols, additional capabilities. What are you looking for? What do you need? Participate. That's a really, really key part of the organization. Use Goose as a test bed. Try things out to see what works and what doesn't. If you're embedding Goose or extending Goose, talk to us about that. How do you want that roadmap to evolve? Again, this is a public good. I mean, use it, extend it, play with it. It's a part of it. You're part owners of it.
Yeah, I agree. If you're a developer, get in the community and start participating with substance. I think that's what makes or breaks these kind of things. That's the most important thing. This is not a marketing thing. This is something where we're going to build things together. If you're an end user, maybe get in and give feedback about what worked, what didn't work, right? If you're a venture capitalist, give us money. All right.
Touché.
All right. In order to make a market together, too, just give a little solace to our venture friends. But I think that's it. Like, the most important thing is that organic innovation. Get in the mix. If you're a business leader and an end user, tell us what's working, what's not, what's missing. And if you're an investor, know that this is where the market's going to happen. And I'm super excited.
I would actually just say, like, it's the thing that we don't know about the agentic future, which is for all these types of people, no matter who you are, even if you don't see today, like, how agentic systems can help you, like maybe it's a bit too techy perhaps, still be vocal about, like, oh, I wish AI could do this. Oh, I wish this task were easier. Like, that's what this can evolve to be. And we really need input from, like, absolutely everyone.
That's a great point, 100%.
I think I speak for all of us, not just here, but kind of in the MCP community, to thank you for your leadership and stewardship in this. I don't think the MCP world would be here without you guys, what you've done here. And thank you so much, especially for being here at MCP Night Holiday Special.